Hello and welcome to another episode of Loud and Opinionated right here on the Loud and Opinionated YouTube channel, also at loudandopinionated.com. You can also catch us over on iTunes and pretty much anywhere you get your podcast. We are there. I am one of your hosts, Jake Williams, alongside with me as always, my co-host Derek Watson.
Hello.
And it's gonna be a fun show. We're gonna be talking about the modern masculinity and this word's fun to say, femininity. Is that how we say it?
Femininity.
Femininity. Yes, we're right. Modern masculinity and femininity is gonna be the main topic of the show. We're also gonna dive a little bit into gender roles and just how society perceives men and women, pretty much. And before we do that, we do the same thing every week. It's time for the Watson Report.
I'm Derek Watson, and this is the Watson Report. We're going to start off with government and politics, and this is also international news, so we're just going to lump it all together because we're lazy. The EU and the U.S., President Trump announced on Wednesday, are working towards zero tariff trade, which is great news for American industry because it'll open up trade with the EU in a way that it hasn't been open before. Plans aren't completely figured out yet. They're still in talks, but one thing that the EU has agreed to is to buy American soybeans, which is a huge export for us. And a big reason why the U.S. was working on a farm bill or a measure to help farmers earlier this week with $12 billion in relief. So this is big news for the U.S. and for the global economy. What do you think, Jake?
I think it's a step in the right direction. I think the whole tariffs things I think is silly. And I think if the farm bill would have been something that gone through, that's $12 billion. That is a self-inflicted wound. I mean, you could argue that, yes, China, is a part of this as well. I understand that. I just think overall, any political view you have, you can understand it. I think they can understand that it's a silly situation that we've got ourselves into. I'm glad that we've made some headway to kind of help farmers out and go in the right direction, because farmers are the ones that have been hurt the most by this stuff. And I hope this can get settled.
Yep. And as Trump has been saying about the tariffs the whole time, because I'm not a huge fan of tariffs in general. However, I understand that Trump is using them as a tool to create better trade climate between the U.S. and other countries. And this is the first example of it actually starting to work out. Also, when it comes to China, I guess they're working to reevaluate their currency by devaluing it in order to curb some of the tariffs that the U.S. has put on them, because it hurts them more than it hurts us. And doing that, I think eventually is going to hurt them in the long run, because a lot of investments in China are going to leave there because their money's not going to be worth as much there. So interesting to see how this is all going to play out. I hope everything works out well. Again, I've been skeptical of the tariffs in some way, but I understand he's using them as a tool, not as a permanent solution. So,
and I want people to understand there's no winning a trade war. It's eventually one side gives up, and one side.
And the other side wins.
There's no winning a trade war.
Yeah, I think there is. If we get these zero tariffs, I'd say that we won, because we're in a better situation than when we started.
In a perfect world, that would happen, but we'll see. We'll see how this plays out.
What's happening right now, Jake? So welcome to a perfect world. On to sports. We're gonna do a little Husker Homer today because we're getting pretty excited about the season that's coming up in the next month. And I just wanted to ask you a question, Jake. As Big Ten Media's days wrapped up, Scott Frost talked a little bit about rivalries, and it's been a big question since Nebraska has joined the Big Ten, and rivalries of old, such as Oklahoma, have kind of faded away since we don't play them anymore. Does Nebraska have a Big Ten rival? Or if they don't, where do you see the most potential for a real rivalry going to the future? Or any other comments you have on that?
I think that Nebraska does have a legitimate rival in two teams. I think not yet, but for the second team. But the first team, I definitely think there's a legitimate rivalry with Iowa. Iowa fans don't like anybody but Iowa. Nebraska fans don't like. I mean, I am living literally in the heart of Iowa, and I can tell you that Iowa fans don't like anybody but themselves. I'm kidding. I know a lot of Iowa fans out there. They're nice people. But I think that is a legit rivalry between those two teams. And I think that, at least for me as a fan, I legitimately look forward to that game. And I know a lot of Hawkeye fans do too. I think that's a legit rivalry. I think when Scott Frost can actually turn Nebraska around and it can be a competitive series, I think Wisconsin is a legitimate Big Ten West rival with Nebraska. I think they're just two very similar teams, not just their uniforms, but the way that Wisconsin wins is exactly how Nebraska won in the 90s, where it was hard-nosed, I formation, beat you into the ground running. So I think those are the two legit rivals that Nebraska has.
All right, here's my point against that. And I would pick those teams as the most likely to become rivals, but I think from a Nebraska's perspective, we see it that way. I don't think either of the other schools see it that way. And it was interesting because you said with Wisconsin, if Nebraska can become competitive with them, but we're not competitive with Iowa either. They've been blowing the doors off us.
Not the last few years, no.
Yeah, and there haven't been any big important games between either of those teams. I do think that there's a disdain between the fans because the Iowa fans, I feel like feel as though they're disrespected because they're not really considered a tier 1 school, even though they've been pretty good for a long time. And Nebraska fans are kind of stuck up because of winning that they had 20 years ago and 40 years ago. So I think like Nebraska doesn't take Iowa fans seriously, even though they've been kicking the crap out of us. And then Iowa fans look at Nebraska fans and say, like, what have you done lately?
Exactly.
So I think, and the fact that we border each other, and there's a lot of jokes about Iowa because they don't have any electricity or running water. So I think that it's a budding rivalry, but there need to be important games. There need to be big games, like where both teams have a chance to go to the Big Ten championship, and they have to beat each other. Like that's how a rivalry starts.
Yeah, and we won't go too much into that because this isn't the Audible that's coming in the fall. But yeah, I agree. I think the West itself needs to get a bigger body and play itself out to be more like the East, because the East has a lot more competitive rivalries because there's a lot more good teams.
They're more historic too.
Right. And
Michigan, Ohio State, Michigan State, Michigan.
It's Wisconsin
and everybody else.
Iowa, then everybody else. Until Nebraska.
Iowa has had a few good years, but overall it's Wisconsin and everybody else. Like they own the West. I'd say.
And you got to give credit where credit's due. Iowa's been, like you said, just dominating Nebraska the last few years. So
yeah, it's been rough. All right, moving on to entertainment news. James Gunn, the director of the Guardians of the Galaxy series, was fired from Disney and Marvel over some tweets that were brought up from years ago. Some pretty disturbing ones, such as, "I like when little boys touch me in my silly place," and "the best thing about being raped is when you're done being raped." And it's like, phew, that was great, not being raped. Tweeted about monkeys masturbating on children and how it made him extremely happy. Had blog posts about high school girls touching themselves and details of how he got off to that. And other controversial tweets and blog posts about child porn, AIDS, 9/11, and the Holocaust. All some pretty bad stuff, stirring up a lot of controversy. I love the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, so it's kind of hard to hear stuff like this. But it's another big Hollywood name kind of being taken down related to the Me Too movement and this moral justice movement. And you realize that some of these people are really disgusting.
Well, I want to go out by saying that, that I don't like what was said in the tweets, and I think they were in poor taste. I understand they were trying, like he claims they were trying to be jokes, and I see that they are tweeted as jokes, but that doesn't mean they're funny. They're very important. They're very poor taste. But I don't think he should have been fired for something that happened 10 years ago. But I understand Disney's stance, because if they don't fire James Gunn, then they can't be, some people are going to do what they did when Roseanne got fired in the first place and say that there's some weird conspiracy against conservative values that ABC has. You know what I mean? So I get the PR move to remove him, because based on principle, they did the same thing with Roseanne with, her racist tweets. You have to do something similar. But
I think there are plenty of examples of people, even if it's stuff that came up 20 years ago, which is much longer than this, that people are held accountable. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, it's pretty disgusting stuff. He's already made millions of dollars. People make mistakes, and I totally understand that, but I just don't think child porn and rape are things to joke about.
No, you shouldn't.
I'm not cool with that. And I would fire somebody that was my employee if I found out they were saying stuff like that too. If I were to tweet that,
if you were to tweet that, we'd be fired. And I honestly, what I said, I'll say the same exact thing I said about Roseanne. Disney is a private company. This is not a First Amendment issue.
Mm-hmm.
This is a company. They have their personal views.
Yep. Something I feel like a lot of people don't understand the whole First Amendment thing when it comes to what a private company can do. It's not.
They can fire you for any reason.
Yeah, it's not that they're actively shutting down your voice or at all getting into your intruding on your First Amendment right. It's that if you don't display the values of a company, they have every right to fire you.
But
they're paying for like that, like the whole NFL protest thing. We don't need to get into that too much, but how people try to say this is a First Amendment rights issue, and like, no, they're actually on company property, on company time. So that is not free protected speech. They can say it, but then they can get fired or fined for it. There's nothing illegal about that.
And that's what I always said. You and I were actually talking to each other when the NFL came down with that rule about fining players or forcing them to stand. How we both, but what we both said was that it was like, regardless of how you feel about the anthem, the NFL is a business and they can run the business how they want. It's the same thing. And but I will say this about opinions. We won't silence you if you write for us at loudandopinionated.com. Just kind of give us a little thing.
I don't know, if you start writing about child porn, I might not post it.
Yeah, or if you're like a Nazi, we reserve the right to not let you write for us.
Yeah, if you're writing about things that are highly illegal or amoral, then we might not put it on there. But just be reasonable. We're not going to silence your ideas for political reasons ever. And then our random news of the day, Jake, our wonderful, beautiful host, went and saw Shania Twain with his girlfriend last night, and he has a story to tell.
For the second time in 2 months. It's not super, crazy. It's just a funny story. Because last weekend, Ashley's friend had been in town, and we had joked about going to see Shania Twain again because she was going to be in Des Moines this week. And I'd said, because of my job, because of where I work, we get a chance to go to a lot of events. And I said, if I have the opportunity, do you want to go? Jokingly, not knowing that, not having, anything with knowing that I could get that. She says jokingly, like, yeah, absolutely. So then Wednesday afternoon, I get an email saying that, there's tickets for that show. So yesterday at 4 p.m., I call Ashley up. I go, you want to go to Shania Twain? She's like, what? I'm like, oh, yeah, I've worked out. We got, I got a chance to go. And so we went, and it was really funny because the tickets we got were like more. It was in Wells Fargo Arena, so that's like the big venue in Des Moines, and the spot that we got was like 312 or something. So that's more up higher, not necessarily nosebleeds, but it's a little bit higher up, not in the lower bowl or anything like that. So we bring the tickets in, they get scanned. The guy that's scanning the tickets says these are reprinted for some, I don't know why they're saying this. You're going to have to go to the ticket office. And so we leave from where we were at, the entrance we were at. So we have to loop back around and go to the ticket office, which is like on the other side. We go in the ticket office. We get there, we talk to the lady, she takes our tickets. It's taking a lot longer than anybody else at the will call of the box office to get tickets, and we're like, what's wrong with our tickets? These are, there's nothing wrong with them. They're not fake. We didn't scab them. And sure enough, we get them, they reseated us, and it was essentially like when you get on an airplane and they boost you to first class kind of thing.
That's never happened to me, but it sounds awesome.
It's happened to people. It's never happened to me, but we went from section like 300 up here down to 100. So we were like right next to the floor. Like we were a couple rows back from the floor, and that's how we experienced that show. I just thought the whole sequence of events was really funny because
that sounds awesome for being free.
And just spur of the moment too. And it was really funny too because I called Ashley about it. And this is where we are in our life, where we're only in our mid to late 20s, but we're already like calculating how much time we'll have for work. So now we're like adults. Because I call her, I go, okay, so I got tickets to the show. I go, I don't know what the time is because I hadn't got the tickets yet. And I can hear her like calculating how many hours of sleep she would get. She's like, well, 4 now, and the show's probably 7, 8 o'clock. And then, you know what? Screw it. We're going. So yeah, it was a great show. Shania is always a fun show. If you ever get a chance to go, I'd recommend going. I don't know how much longer this tour is, but I would recommend going. Whoever likes Shania.
You woman, Jake?
I do. All right, so now it's time for the main topic of the show. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about masculinity and femininity and everything in between, gender roles, all those kind of things. So, Derek, I got to ask a question. What is the definition of masculinity? So we know where we're at.
Well, I think it's important to start off our roots with like kind of the classical definition of masculinity and femininity as it pertained to society before where we are today. So throughout history in general, 30,000 foot view, there in most societies has been masculinity and femininity as a way of divvying up responsibilities in a society. And masculinity usually, fell on the males, and it was anything that had to do with security and strength and courage, going to war and fighting for your family or society, building, doing laborious jobs, hunting, just the general things you associate with strength and protection and macho. Whereas femininity, on the other hand, was more about the family and nurturing and, caring for the home, and focusing more on emotion versus rational decisions. And this is, like I said, this is historically what I think we're going to talk more about today. I just think it's important to remember that. And there is important reasons to have both of those different roles in society. And having those roles, I think, biologically affected the way men and women evolved over time, because for thousands of years, women cared for the family and weren't expected to do as much of the physical activity as men were expected to do. So that's the foundation of masculinity and femininity. And in my opinion, I think those roles are still just as important now, in different ways. I mean, maybe, it's not like we're all having to hunt and go to war and stuff nowadays, since technology and peace have become things. But I think a lot of those roles, like protection and strength and law and order, as well as family values and nurture and emotional strength, I think they're all really important now. But it's totally changed the dynamic of men and women taking on these roles and to the extent of which roles are taken. But I also think that some people have kind of taken it too far with modern masculinity and femininity. So there's, in a nutshell, my thoughts on like what it is, to be masculine or to be feminine.
Yeah, and I mean, even you can trace masculinity and things like that back to the beginning of human society. I mean, the whole idea was the hunter-gatherer was the men has the men have the responsibility of being the strong of the partnership and going out and providing and hunting and doing all these things. And of course, as we should, society has definitely evolved. And I think where we are, I agree with you that there are certain issues to masculinity now, and there's obviously that beautiful phrase of toxic masculinity. I'm not a fan of
there are
that.
issues. I don't think there are issues with masculinity. I just think it's evolved.
No.
Yeah.
I was. I'll clear that up. What I was saying was obviously there's some people that take it to the extreme, is what you said. So I want to clear that up. And
Okay.
yeah, and
With
I totally get with you on that. And I want to point out I do not like the phrase toxic masculinity. I think it exists, but I just don't like it. But yeah, for me, masculinity is I love the fact that it's just so different now, because I don't think I would have fit into the rules and the societal norms of masculinity when my dad was around, because I just don't, you know what I mean? I think that
I think that's you're a product of the generation you live in as well, where you'd be a completely different person if you were raised in a different time. So I think that's kind of hard to say. I do think so. I think that it was basically, if I had to guess, like the start of the Industrial Revolution is probably when it really started to change, like where the need for the man playing the masculine role and the woman playing the feminine role, like where that changed a little bit, because we got to the point where with mass production and a free market, that you don't have to do all the things that families used to have to do. Thousands of years ago, you're responsible for getting all the food and for building your house and like taking care of everything. You had more roles that you had to divvy up between your team as a family. Whereas now, like the family isn't as important as it used to be, for better or worse, and there's not nearly as much of a need for big manly men all the time. So yeah, I think that for a lot of people that's probably is a good thing. It's easier for people to kind of choose how they want to act and be in society.
Yeah, and there's just a really good quote that there was in an article from Capable Men. I thought I said man. CapableMen.com. There's actually a quote in one of the articles about masculinity that was from David Finkner, or from Chuck. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name. From the book Fight Club, where it says, quote, "We're designed to be hunters and we're in a society of shopping. There's nothing to kill anymore. There's nothing to fight. Nothing to overcome, nothing to explore, and that society emasculation, every man is born." So we're not in a war. We're not in a need for soldiers. We're not in a need for fighting. We're not in a need for this, primal need for these things that men have. And it's it's scientific even. I mean, it's testosterone is what it is. And we're in this weird stage of life where we don't need that anymore. And that's not to say that we don't need men like that or we need people like that. And I also want to kind of talk about like.
Well, I want to say it's not. We don't need it in the same way that we needed it before.
No, it needs to change.
I still do think that we need protection. We need builders still. There's still people in construction. There still are soldiers in the military that need to be strong. I think that nowadays, especially with more gender fluidity, which we'll get more into our next serious topic we do will probably be that. I think that the roles can be split between men and women a little bit more, and it's more acceptable in society. And I don't think that the approach should be to call masculinity toxic. If a guy's being an a-hole, that's one thing. If a guy is using his strength to hurt women or to put them down, because he's physically stronger than them, then that's absolutely wrong. And I don't think that's masculinity as much as that guy's an ass. And
that's cowardice. That's different. Yeah, and that's cowardice. That's not masculinity. And what I was saying was, I think with how masculinity evolves and changes, I think masculinity, being manly, and saying my dad's generation, maybe before that, maybe baby boomers before that, stuff like that. Masculinity, just on a societal sense, men weren't supposed to cry. Men weren't supposed to share their feelings, and they would get ostracized for it. And where now we're supposed to have a wide spectrum of emotion, because that's just being a human being. I think like what I'm trying to say is, with masculinity now, I think we're more in touch with who we are, and we're accepting of, it's okay to cry at a sad movie or something when something sad happens. It's okay to like something that might be a little bit more feminine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, I agree. Like, you just went to Shania Twain for the second time in 2 months.
And I had a great time.
Totally okay. And I completely agree with you there that it's good that men are more willing to share emotions and to be more accepting of what they feel. I do think there's a line where people, to take it too far, and maybe, I don't know how to say, like, exaggerate emotions or just become way too dramatic. And I think that, especially when it comes to, like, decision making, politically or in your life or in relationships, I think that there should be a balance between rational decisions and emotional decisions, where you have to take both into account. And I think that kind of goes back to the old version of masculinity and femininity, and how they balance each other out. Is that the old femininity was the emotional part of the decision that had to do with the family, and masculinity was more of the rational, like, moving to find the next source of food.
Which is totally opposite about my relationship. Ashley is the one that's logical and thinks these things out, and I'm the more emotional type.
True. and I think that's totally okay. And I think that, like, that's the cool thing about where we're at in society now, is that we can kind of mix and match some of the traits. You find the partner that balances you out. And the thing that I think is important to know is that it's still okay for a man to be manly.
Absolutely.
Like, if that's the way, like, I enjoy working out and being strong. I enjoy, doing physical labor. I love sports and competition and things like that. I also love chick flicks, rom-coms. I'm all about it. And I think that, like, I don't think that I should be looked at, as like a misogynist or something, because I love being strong and being a provider in a relationship and a protector.
Yeah, and I think I totally agree. I mean, there was a time, I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago, I went with one of my friends to chop some wood. That was the most manliest thing I'd experienced in a long time. And it was so much, and it's fun. There's nothing wrong with shooting guns or chopping wood or, like you said, working out, doing these really manly things. I think you should do them. I think there absolutely is that's the thing, is, it's you can have a tenderness and you can be in touch with your emotions, but at the same time, it's totally okay to crack open a cold one with the boys and drink beer and, do whatever, just have a good time.
I think sometimes people conflate me wanting to be manly and do manly things and being okay with that. And people conflate that with me saying that women can't do that. And that, that's not my feeling at all. If a woman wants to do more masculine things, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think that's where we're at in society, where people are just more accepting of, do what you want, whatever's going to float your own boat, as long as it doesn't sink mine. Just understand that some people are going to be more masculine, some people are going to be more feminine. And oftentimes it's good to have the dichotomy in general, even though it's more mix and match than it's ever been before.
We should have just named this podcast "You Can Have Both," because we said this. the religious episode, the religion episode where we said science and religion can work. You can have both. It's the same thing. You can have this more modern masculinity, and you can still have those old school values. You're exactly right.
Mhm.
You can have both. They can coexist. For whatever reason, our society is at this stage where we're so accepting of a lot of things, but then we think because we tolerate things or accept things, we have to get rid of the other thing. No,
Yeah,
they
it's
can
like
work together.
it's as if you're in a big boat and it was tipping one way, non-acceptance and gender roles in a problematic way where you're forcing people into positions that they don't want to be in, and so then everybody ran to the other side of the boat, and now we got to get to the point where we're in the middle. It's okay. You can have relationships that are very old school traditional relationships where the man works and does his manly protection duties and physical labor, and the woman stays at home and takes care of the kids and cooks and cleans. There's nothing wrong with having that situation if both people in it want to do that.
And you know what else?
There's nothing wrong with the exact reverse being true too.
Yeah, exactly. And here's another thing that's going to probably blow some people's minds that are too old school. Gay men can be very manly too, and I think that's also a negative or something that people think that can't exist. That masculinity only exists for straight men. No, gay men can be masculine as well. It's very much a moving thing.
Yeah, and I think that there's because of hormones and testosterone and our physical makeup and the history, like I mentioned in the beginning, where masculinity and femininity come from and how that affected our genetic makeup going forward, that a heterosexual male, cisgender male, is probably going to be more likely to be more masculine than a heterosexual cisgender female or heterosexual or a homosexual male, just because of their genetic makeup. But that doesn't, it's not like an absolute thing.
Yeah, and it's
an odds game.
It's not only and it's like we said, there is a science to it, but with everything, there's also personality. I mean, there's tomboys, there's straight women that are into fishing and hunting and into more manly things. It's totally possible. So
and our lesson, just like it always is, don't be afraid to talk about it. Don't shut down people's opinion, and be accepting of everybody as long as they aren't actively hurting you or someone else.
Yeah, man, we're all in this together. We're all experiencing this together. So I want to kind of we touched on it a little bit more. I want to talk a little bit more about this before we get to femininity. So toxic masculinity. I want, like we were saying, we've been trying to stress to be clear. I don't think that toxic masculinity means that men are evil. I don't think that's kind of the intention. But I think it's back to what we're saying, where you can have the core masculine values, but don't be a dick. Is essentially what they're saying. And you're a coward. You're not a man if you sexually harass and assault women. That's just not being a man. That's not being masculine. That's just something we want to make very clear. Being a man, being manly is totally different than being a jerk. Totally different things. So now let's kind of define. Oh, go ahead.
Well, it's just a final note on toxic masculinity. I just think that it's dangerous to use that because it's kind of the term wasn't even around, I don't think, until like 2008. It's a newer term, but it's coming from feminist scholars is where it originated, and it's a way to say, that men by being men and having certain advantages in society, wrong or right, because just by being who they are hurting females. By being masculine, that you're hurting women. And I just think I don't think that's the correct approach in solving any problems by blaming somebody else. It's more of, if there's problems in workplaces, you should fight on the actual issues that are if there's sexual harassment, fight against sexual harassment. Don't just lump it in and conflate it with masculinity, because I don't think, like you said, that's sexual harassment is not okay, and that's not masculine. That's just wrong.
Right. It gives a combative tone to what you're trying to talk about, and that's never good. When right out of the gate, you have to be defensive about something.
Yeah, exactly. That's not how you solve problems.
So similar to masculinity, how would we define femininity? What is that?
Well, I mean, I think I went over that when I kind of defined both. Femininity is just more of the nurturing. Is the first word that comes to mind for me.
Right.
Family oriented, more emotion based decision making, being more in touch with yourself, less physical, and taking care of people. And that's these are traits that are stereotypically associated with women.
Yeah.
Because of that's going back to the classic form of the family and society. That's how it worked in most cases. And so now, it's much more common, I think. Like we were saying, same thing with masculinity and femininity. I think it's the same thing. And I'd like to just lead this into a discussion on gender roles as a whole. And I think we've touched on it a little bit at this point. I feel like there's a really negative connotation with gender roles. And I understand to some extent that we're saying that it's okay for men to do the cooking and cleaning and staying home. And maybe defining it to a specific gender isn't the right way to do it. But I think that what's getting lost is that the roles are still important to have in a relationship.
Yeah.
Whether that be, a couple or like a friendship or a partnership in any way, the masculine roles and the feminine roles are still important. It doesn't matter as much who's taking them over, but you don't want two people in a relationship that are completely emotional and can't really take care of themselves or protect themselves. Totally feminine people, or also you don't want two completely masculine people that are, stoic and less emotional and more focused on strength.
Yeah, and that's I was gonna lead into that too. I think that's why it's hard. It can be hard on families that have single parents, because you can definitely have one, but it's a lot of stress to put on that parent to have to play both roles, and it puts them in a rough situation. So if they're lucky enough to be in a situation where the parents are adults about the situation and civil when they split up. But yeah, I totally agree that you need both. Whoever does it, you need that duality in your life, because you got to have, the joke is you can't have one without the other, or not necessarily joke, the saying. And it's just hard on people. I mean, as someone who's coming from a broken home, it's just a weird position to be in, because I was still getting both of them, but it's just a situation where you definitely need both.
Yeah, it's not the same, but it's not a cohesive unit working together.
And that's also not to say that it can't be done. Mm-hmm. It can definitely be done.
Oh yeah,
there's strong.
Every situation is so different.
Right. In terms of femininity, we kind of touched on it too with the nurturing. Again, it goes back to the idea of the masculinity, where nurturing is associated with it, and the gender role is that. But a father can absolutely be tender and nurturing.
Mm-hmm.
I know that wasn't the case in my house. I know my dad had to be the disciplinarian, because my mom's threat was always wait until your dad gets home, and then I was terrified of my dad. So I was kidding. I love my dad. He was a great guy. But I was definitely worried, because he was the one who always had to spank me. What are you doing?
Fixing your shoe.
Ashley's fixing the sandal, apparently.
Derek says hi.
Yeah, okay, so let's talk about kind of what I was talking about earlier. The role, if we're going by traditional gender roles, everything that would, like I said earlier, our relationship's different. I'm the emotional one, she's the logical one. When we moved in together, she had the toolbox and not me. Can you believe that? I didn't even have a toolbox, and now she's over there.
I can totally believe that because I know you.
She's trying to fix my flip flop right now with super glue and a hammer.
The hammer is for weight to keep it.
The hammer is to keep it sealed.
You would just throw it away.
That's what I'm trying to tell her. Well, she doesn't want me to wear my American flag flip flop. She hates them. But but that's something I want to bring up, where how we perceive gender roles, where the idea is there has to be a power dynamic in a relationship. There has to be a dominant force. There has to be a more submissive force. There has to be, the alpha, the beta. I personally don't think that's true, because if that were true, if that were true, Ashley's 100% the alpha, because she will always make more money than me, and she's yelling at me that she's the alpha right now. She's in the room too.
But my question would be, though, like, how you pretty much just said it was true, but then you said you didn't believe in it. That she is, the alpha in your power dynamic. There's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, the relationship works. You guys are both very happy, and you're always, as long as there's a difference between, being an alpha in a relationship, and using that to take advantage of the other person. As long as you're working together, in my opinion, it's just like if somebody's a stay-at-home versus the other person's working. Just because the person's working is making all the money doesn't devalue the other person. It just means that they bring in, that part of the relationship. Just like I know you do a lot for Ashley and you love her a lot, so it's not like you don't contribute to the relationship.
Well,
I think as long as you're working towards the same goal, you got to think about it as you're both pulling something, not that you're fighting against each other. So it doesn't really matter who's pulling harder, because you're both pulling in the same direction.
Well, yeah, and that's what I was saying when we were off the air. Was it's if you look at it that way, if you look at alpha and beta, I don't necessarily think that you're looking at it the right way. I agree with what you're saying. It's a partnership.
Mm-hmm. And
however that works for the relationship is, it's different, and everybody's different. But how that's got to work is, you're right. You're on the same team. You're going for the same goal.
And every relationship's different. The whole alpha beta, it comes from, wolf packs. You have the alpha male and then the beta male, and the alpha makes the primary decisions, and the beta follows, and kind of leads the rest of the pack. And they are all working together as a family in that case. So but every situation's so different. And I just want to say with gender roles, I think that we just need to shift the way that we're looking at it more than combating against gender roles, in that the way that masculinity and femininity have evolved, with our industrial, open free market society, that men and women can trade some of these roles. The roles are still, it's more of the masculine role and the feminine role, but that doesn't necessarily have to be directly associated with your sex. But I think my whole point is that we shouldn't be completely, ignoring the fact that those roles are necessary in a lot of cases. It's just a little bit more fluid now.
So, okay, I can see where you're going with that. Are you saying that it's more of like the way that we look at it is, what happened?
I just realized I've been using my computer mic this whole time, because
oh boy.
I just looked over. I was like, wait a minute, that's not plugged in.
Well,
okay. All right, whatever.
We'll make it work. Yeah, so I kind of like what you're going with that. So are you saying that it's kind of like the idea of whatever the gender roles may be, let's look at it this way. These are just things that need to be done, and either one of us could do them. Say it's cooking, say it's cleaning, say it's dishes, or that sort of thing.
And you can share some responsibilities, but still, in most relationships, I think that it is going to be more defined. One person is more of the protector than the other person is, and one person might be more of the nurturer than the other person. A good relationship is one where you have all the elements. And I just think that a lot of the talk about gender roles now is just completely just blowing it up. And what I'm just saying is that maybe we just need to change our view on it, the way that masculinity and femininity have changed in how they're a part of our society, that we need to change the way that we're looking at these roles.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think it's it goes back to the idea that you're a team. When you're a team, you play to every player's best strength. So when you're in a relationship, you just figure out what works for you guys. Who has who's better, everything. Ashley's great at everything, so I just kind of loaf around. She's great at everything, so I just make her laugh. That's essentially what I do.
Yep.
I make her laugh.
I like that.
And and I listen to her. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, she's like the big mob boss, and you're like the sidekick right next to her that like repeats everything she says and laughs.
Yeah, what she said.
She carries the team, but you're there.
Yeah, I've also found out that
you're like Blake Bortles in the playoffs last year.
Oh God,
you're there because you need a quarterback.
You gotta have somebody snap the ball. I go back to what I was saying earlier, where she's a logical one. So I feel like she's very logical about things. So I'm the guy that has to be like who's always more emotional. So I'm the white guy that's yelling at them, like I need to see the manager. Like I'm always the one that displaces the rage about every situation. She's the one who like calm down. Let's think about this. Let's think how to get him later because she holds a grudge. No, I'm kidding. She's just looking at me. That's why I'm saying these things. But yeah, it's all about balance. With anything in life, it's all about balance. It's all about figuring out how it works out. So, speaking of figuring out how it works out and balance, part of your balanced week is getting this episode and this podcast every week. It's Loud and Opinionated. You can find it at loudandopinionated.com. You can also find it on iTunes. Pretty much anywhere you get podcasts, we are there. You can also watch this on YouTube. We'll also have clips of different segments of the show. So if you don't have the time to watch all of the show, you can just watch clips from the show. And you can even write for us. Derek, how do people write for Loud and Opinionated?
Well, if you have any opinions that you want to get out there, we're here to help you share them as long as they're not about, child porn or rape or things of that sort. Just go ahead and send me an email, derek@loudandopinionated.com. Include at least 300 words, up to 1,000, 2,000, whatever. As long as it's not a novel and at least 300 words, I'd say. A couple of pictures and the links to wherever you got those pictures from, your name, and then if you want to include any social media accounts or websites or whatever, send that over to us and we'll get that posted on the website as soon as we can. I do want to say in the next 1 to 2 weeks, there's going to be some major updates to the website, and we're going to be changing the way that you can submit blog posts to make it a lot easier for you to be able to just create an account and do it all online and not have to email me anything. But it's all a work in progress. I do have a full-time job on top of this, so I don't always have time to get this stuff done. But within the next couple of weeks, we'll have a lot of updates. I'll be really excited to show you.
All right, so thanks so much for watching, listening, and however you got this show. Thank you so much. Couldn't do it without you. Have a great day.